I'm going to tell you how you can adapt and aim like Shroud. Shroud is the self-proclaimed most adaptable player in FPS gaming. He has the ability to quickly become a top-tier player in any FPS. I found some pretty shocking ways on how you can improve, so you want to stick around for those. Also, this video is part of a series where I look at pros and streamers to give advice, so if you like it, subscribe for more. As always, sources are in the description. First of all, I want to look at his sensitivity. When picking up a new game, many of us will convert our sense from our old game to our new game. The logic is that this will allow our skills to carry over. However, scientifically, muscle memory does not affect our aim in this way. Anyone who's familiar with this channel knows that, and so do most top tier pros. So Shroud has no problem changing his sense when he loads into a new game. Instead, Shroud goes into the game, starts on default settings, and changes his sense until he feels comfortable with what he is playing on. This allows him to be more adaptable because he is able to choose a sense that best suits the conditions of that game. How this relates to his mechanics is actually really cool. But before we can look at how Shroud's sense affects his mechanics, we have to look at what his mechanics actually are, as they are the source of his adaptability. He uses a relatively unique grip that is based on using his middle finger and pointer finger on top of his mouse and his two other fingers off to the side. His palm does touch the mouse at times, though this grip allows for some finger motion. He also uses significant arm and wrist motion. This allows him to adjust his aim with 3 separate types of motions. He can make larger motions with his arm and wrist, and smaller, more precise motions with his wrist and fingers. So when Shroud changes his sense, his mechanics actually change. While his mouse grip and form all look the same, he changes how much he gets out of a wrist flick simply because the human wrist is only capable of so much motion. This means that in a game he uses a lower sense, he's required to use more arm motions, while in a game he uses a higher sense, he can get a longer range of motion in-game from his wrist flicks, which results in his wrist flicks having a larger potential in a game he uses a higher sense. However, in games he uses a lower sense, Shroud can use his arm to track targets more precisely, as the human arm can only move so exactly. Notice how in games with lower TTKs like Siege and Valorant, Shroud uses a higher sense. Both these games have relatively fast TTKs, meaning that it is more important to flick to a target than to track it, making a higher sense more viable for Shroud's wrist flicking style. However, in Warzone there are vehicles and the TTK is much slower. For that reason, Shroud uses a lower sensitivity, as this allows him to move his arm more precisely over long distances. Similarly, in CSGO, Shroud has a lower sensitivity. I found plenty of players who have played both Val and CSGO complain about how the TTK seems much faster in Valorant. This is for a bunch of reasons, including server differences and how that affects hit recognition. For that reason, I see why Shroud shows a slightly lower sense on CSGO. Apex has one of the slowest TTKs on the list, so I was initially surprised to see just how high Shroud's sense is on Apex. But after watching 3 seconds of this clip, I think we can all tell that flicking is essential to his playstyle in Apex, as he's constantly being forced to flick to a different target. With the exception of Warzone, the other games are 5v5 and much slower paced. While flicking between targets is hugely important, these games will never have a scenario like being pinched between 2 teams in Apex and having to take a 6 or more back-to-back gunfights. Warzone has the potential, though I believe Shroud felt better on the lower sense due to the importance of tracking vehicles. Therefore, I am confident in saying that the best way to adapt your aim to a new game in a similar manner to Shroud is to load it in and slowly change your sense to optimize motions for that game. You should also use wrist motion and hand motion and finger motion to optimize mouse movement. If you like this kind of video, check out another one in the series and subscribe. Also, if you want to learn more about Shroud's mouse grip, I'd recommend this video I watched when making this video. It's a really good source.